The first time I ever played Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island was the first time I had ever really paid attention to the background in a video game, the implication of a world beyond the X and Y axes that I existed on. Sure, it was always there in other games I had played up until that point, which really only amounted to about 4 games. But even still, look at these. The art here is just gorgeous. These places don't necessarily feel real in the same sense that this is real, but it helps to validate the world's authenticity within itself and to itself. This art really pops off the screen, which really does help Yoshi's Island to stand on its own as a wholly unique experience when compared to its contemporaries. There is a ton of great art in this game, but funny enough, the one piece of background art that stuck with me more than any of them, really, was the simplest one. The least visually busy. It's this. God, I love this image so much. I remember specifically the 5-6 stage, which featured a sunset version of this same image. I barely paid any attention to the level I was supposed to be navigating, and instead just stared off into the distance. I imagined myself walking on one of those tiny islands, the warm sun shining brilliantly off the calm waves. I thought about swimming in those tropical waters, a rush of blood to the head as I dived straight into the refreshingly cool salt water. I just wanted to be there in that moment so badly. But this is the Super Nintendo. I couldn't just break out of the constraints of a two-dimensional game. That sort of thing was kind of unheard of. The only thing I can think of that really compares even slightly would be all the rumors I had heard about jumping the flagpole in the original Super Mario Bros. Looking at this image 25 years later, I still feel that sense of longing. That captivating ocean, kept just out of reach behind 16-bit graphics tiles and early gaming's hardware limits. That deep desire never truly left. It sort of just sat in the back of my mind, waiting for games to become a little more advanced. Advanced enough to where they could fill that hole. And I didn't have to wait long. I have a confession to make. I was born last century. I know, it's pretty bad. But like most not quite millennial, not quite Gen Z men, I played a lot of Halo. I played Halo 1 the week it came out. I played Halo 2 and 3 on the days of their release. I lost all my time to Forge mode. I finished every campaign on every difficulty, except this one. I read all the books. When it comes down to it, I am a ride or die fan for Mr. John Halo. I still remember seeing Halo's wide-open vistas for the first time. The frozen canyons of Assault on the Control Room. The massive metal caverns of the Silent Cartographer. And the high cliff walls of Halo. A similar kind of longing entered my mind. The very same longing that made me wish so badly I could travel to those far-off islands of Super Mario World 2. Whereas before, I knew without a doubt I would never be able to break outside the game's hard limits to visit those islands. Here, it didn't seem like it would be too far-fetched to at least try. I never missed a single chance to try and wander out of the main playable area. I felt like a bloodhound sniffing out any trace or hint of geometry that I could exploit. Before long, I was standing in places I once thought impossible, sequence breaking the mission structure and skipping entire parts of the level. There was nothing stopping me, other than my own ability to find these exploits in level geometry and my own stubbornness. I still remember in Halo 2 figuring out that you can skip the entire first firefight in the Outskirts mission by using a pile of rubble to get onto these rooftops, which also led me to this eerily quiet highway. I remember flying to this large metal support in Assault on the Control Room, only to be met with this really beautiful piano piece. I looked everywhere for things like this, and the design of Halo's environments seemed only to encourage this style of play. Seeing these colossal rooms stretching out into the distance with intricate metalwork and large supports, how could I not want to get out there? It felt like a jungle gym for giants, begging me to experiment in all the ways I could climb it. I would see scenes like this and be filled with overwhelming euphoria and determination as all the possibilities of just how and where I could go reeled through my mind. I was an explorer, and the distant mountains and Forerunner structures were an uncharted frontier just begging to be conquered. All the places I could get to that maybe the developers didn't intend. All the new heights I could reach and the new perspectives I could experience. I remember finding the Rex tag, the Scarab gun, climbing to the top of this bridge just because I could, and getting to the top of the Silent Cartographer's Island for the first time. This kind of thing was definitely a lot more common in the second game, but still, there are so many places where these boundary breaks are possible that I can't even keep count. There are plenty of games now, especially during the 6th generation, that offer these unintentional out-of-bounds experiences. Unused wastelands of repeating textures, simplified terrain that leads to nothing, and rooms that never get used. And Halo, for one reason or another, was filled to the brim with things like this. I didn't stop at Halo. This was only the beginning. And now it wasn't only for the desire to travel new places that I could only dream of. It was partially for the challenge.
I look for ways to get out of bounds in nearly every game that I played. Super Mario, Sonic the Hedgehog, Destroy All Humans, Grand Theft Auto, Jak and Daxter, Shadow of the Colossus. It didn't matter. I would start up every play session and look to the borders of those worlds with one single sentence stuck in my brain. I gotta get the fuck out of here.
The release of Halo 3 felt like a hugely defining moment for video games. Its launch felt like a monument to what the future of gaming could be. In 2007, it felt like the entire world stopped for this release. Everyone was in on it. TV commercials, the local news, toy stores, Mountain Dew, 7-Eleven, billboards and posters that took up entire building facades. You could not escape this thing. I, like every other kid, was hyped beyond measure. Not just to finish the fight, but I was equally excited to once again bring these little nerds to their knees when I find all the different ways to show that they cannot contain me. But then Halo 3 was released, and something felt different. The environments were no less colossal or complex, if anything they were more so. More eye-catching, more geometrically dense. There was just this one thing, a single new addition to the series that would stand in the way of my exploration. In Halo 3, the devs actually placed invisible barriers around a majority of the campaign. Getting to these impossible places now takes significantly more effort than it once did. There were still a few areas where you could get out of bounds or climb up to unused areas, sure. But compared to the nearly unrestrained nature of the previous two games, the level of freedom was way down. But I wouldn't let that stop me. The more the game pushed me, the more I started to push back. I wasn't going to take no for an answer. But Halo 3 simply refused to compromise on its linearity and segmentation. Its strict walls that boxed me inside these invisible hallways and kept my path through the campaign annoyingly rigid at all times. I got stubborn. I got angry. I was determined to beat them at their own game. I thought harder and began to experiment. And before long, I started breaking things. I clipped through walls, I defied the laws of physics. I manipulated vehicles in ways I never thought possible. I could break through barriers and move at blinding speeds. I could float through the air and climb up trees. With a bit more effort, I was once again standing in those impossible places, seeing things that the developers didn't want me to see. But the things I found outside those borders were much different than before. Once I was able to find new weapons, deliberate Easter eggs, beautiful vistas, and new perspectives on places that I was already more than familiar with. But here, just outside the normal playable area, things started to get weird. The world was severely damaged, tearing itself apart, leaving behind fragments of normality and objects that left me positively mystified. The broken geometry, the visual bugs, I had gone too far. Regions beyond that barely held themselves together. A universe of broken possibilities. The void, infinite, and corrupt. I have one more thing that I need to run by you. I know it may come as somewhat of a shock, but unfortunately, I do have almost 200 hours in VR chat. I know. I'm not proud of it either. But sometimes it's nice to just take a break from this and just chill out on the beach with a bunch of strangers. Sit in a cozy apartment and listen to the rain. Watch tropical fish swim by the massive window of this underwater lounge. Or maybe take cover from a snowstorm inside this warm snowy cabin with friends while someone plays the most vile vor video you've ever seen just a few feet behind you.
What the hell am I watching on the TV? What am I watching on the TV, man?
I have put a lot more into VR chat than I care to admit. I made an avatar of myself, and I've created multiple worlds for people to explore and chat in VR. I have another friend who also creates worlds for VR chat, and this same friend is also suffering from the same affliction that I suffer from. He, like me, cannot stop trying to break the games he plays. Most recently, he documented his travels far beyond the invisible borders of Azeroth in World of Warcraft. It's seriously crazy just how much Frontier sits beyond the playable area. But I'm getting off topic. As I stated before, this friend of mine, his name is Lliam, also creates worlds for VR chat, and one of those worlds perfectly embodies his love for out-of-bounds exploration. This is the Friend Zone. The Friend Zone is big. It's bigger than big. It almost feels like procedural generation, or like a massive terrain that a game dev accidentally scaled too large and then promptly forgot about. Lliam has added cars to help players traverse the world, and they are bonkers fast. But even at top speed, it still takes minutes to travel from one end of the world to the other. In the center of the Friend Zone is a mountain with a giant hummingbird floating above it. The scale of this thing is wild. It might be about as big as a lot of mountains I've seen in real life, but you truly get a sense for how tall this thing is when you teleport to the top. The starting area is almost a tiny speck in the distance. And it's here at the summit that we start to get our first few tastes of that far-off exploration we've been craving. Out in the distance, there are more than a few interesting locations that can be seen, too far away to truly make out what they are. So you drive over miles of desolate terrain, travel to reaches far beyond the mountain. Here's just a few things you can find. This large reverse Fahrenheit symbol, a reference to Liam's music project called Flake State. A castle sitting on the shores of a lake that I actually modeled myself, one that also features this plaque adorned with a Snapchat he sent me in high school. And this massive loop, a loop that, to this day, I have never completed a full rotation of. But maybe someday. And that's only beginning to scratch the surface. The longer you look, the more you start to find these little hidden secrets that only the most inquisitive players will uncover. Players that, admittedly, have to have a pretty high amount of patience. It's just VR chat. Why make this world so expansive? What was the reason for hiding all of these secrets that only a few people would really find through great effort? Why spend all this time creating a world that is so onerous to sink your teeth into? Well, I asked him.
Throughout my life, I have had episodes of this kind of phantom nostalgia for the unknown and for what might be hidden beyond the literal or metaphysical bounds of our backyard. Ever since I can remember, I've had these lucid dreams and visions of places, structures, and forms. Before I was developed enough to understand any of it, it scared the living out of me. So many of the PlayStation games that I had my parents rent from me back in the early 2000s sort of helped me to alchemize what I was going through at that time. And I'm talking games like Midnight Club 2, Jak and Daxter 2, Tony Hawk's Underground 2, the original Star Wars Battlefront 2, ATV Off-Road Fury. There's a music-making game I played a lot on PS2 called Amplitude. Alright? So there's sort of a pattern there, but truthfully, those were my favorite games growing up. Those early virtual sandboxes helped to sort of ground me in the settings of my own dreams. I strongly believe that these video games and their virtual worlds were instrumental in helping me to become better at dreaming and just improve my perspective in general. Because up until then, my dreams had been this series of horrible nihilistic nightmares. And I'm pretty sure that stemmed from the trauma I went through as a young boy. When I was around 5 years old, I was actually attacked by a fully grown Great Dane, which to a person that size is like a horse. So I was rushed to the ER where they were trying to calm me down, and they ended up giving me an adult dose of this thing called ketamine, which is actually a horse tranquilizer traditionally. So eventually I completely seized out, and long story short, that was basically my superhero origin story, because not long after that, I was legally diagnosed with Asperger's and Tourette syndrome. Let's just say I'm super duper expressive with my complex motor tics. In 2017, I discovered this super meta computer game called VRChat. And I don't mean Mark Zuckerberg meta. It's a free-to-play sort of social networking experience that gives you the power and tools to create boundlessly and explore the creations of others. A whole 2 years later, I decided to create my own VRChat world called the Friend Zone. It is basically a virtual zone for friends. I wanted to make a liminal dream space inspired by hidden areas in video games and those dreams I often had and still have even now. It may not look like much at first glance, apart from the giant floating hummingbird centerpiece, but that dreamlike spaciousness is sort of intentional. When I was only 12, I used to manage my own World of Warcraft and Garry's Mod servers, which back in 2007 you had to configure heavily with SQL software. And there is a possibility that I snuck my mom's credit card once or twice to pay for that monthly fee. Mom, if you're watching, I promise I'll pay you back eventually, okay? But with these private servers, me and my friends would get on after school and build whatever we wanted. And make videos. It was a really great time. So VRChat, in a way, is a culmination of all of the best things that those games allowed you to do. And on top of that, it's free. Many of the themes and visuals found in the Friend Zone can also be found in my music. You may stumble upon various Easter eggs that represent a song or build upon the lore of Flake State. Sooner than later, before I'm fucking 30 years old, I'm hoping to release my very first album, and I am naming it In Alternate Moments. This is an album I've been working on for 4 years, and I'm proud to say it will contain 14 new Flake State songs. From since I was a child up until now, I've spent most of my time in video games just trying to break them and get past the invisible walls of the set story area to see if the developers may have hidden anything out there. I've spent thousands of hours doing this over the years, and I have no shame in saying it. I think in a way doing this it was a lot more captivating, knowing that those places were never meant to be seen by the casual player. I hope you make time to listen to my album when it comes out, and I hope you explore my worlds in VR chat if you ever have a moment. I want to thank Mr. Brian Henken for letting me talk about all of this on his video, and I'd like to thank you for listening. There is so much left to know. Take care.
And once again, I am Lliam Bishop Evans, signing off.
Even with a lot of games being open world now, I still find it really difficult to scratch that same itch that Halo once did. Sure, I can go anywhere I want at any time and complete any challenge in any way that I want, but it still doesn't make me feel like this made me feel. And really, when it comes down to it, I don't think that my experience is going to be much different from all of the other players who are tackling outposts in any way that they wish. I want to feel like I was the first to discover something. I want to feel like my experience was unique to me in some way. These worlds just don't spark my imagination in quite the same way. And I don't feel like it takes much effort to reach even the most difficult locations. Unless it's done really cheaply. I know it sounds silly, but I want so badly for a game to come along that makes me feel like I can beat the developers at their own game. And that can be a hard thing to find. Occasionally you do find something really special, like glitching your way into Mexico in Red Dead Redemption 2, and finding that it actually has unique music for that area. Using old school mode to get to the top of these buildings in Call of Duty 4. The distant barren wastelands of Skyrim and Fallout 4 that seem to go on forever until they crash into this unfinished ocean. For me, these things have become a lot harder to find in modern games as they've become more open and paradoxically more restrictive in their design. What I do appreciate though are games that understand this philosophy of game-breaking discovery and interweave it into their core gameplay loops. The best example I can think of would be Naissance, where the design of its mind-boggling world seems to prod your imagination at every turn. Every puzzle, every colossal hallway, every chasm of overly complex alien architecture tantalizes with the promise of meaningful discovery and the multitude of ways to achieve that. Look at all the possibilities. Look at all the places I could go. I step into this room and immediately I'm thinking of ways to claw my way to the top, carefully inch my way to the very bottom, or find secret alcoves, rooms, and passageways snaking along those colossal cliffs of overly complex concrete. It just gets your mind racing. And it's also impossible. As much as I'd like to view this world as an exciting playground, I know that deep down it's quite the opposite. Naissance is vast, untouched wilderness of rugged, mountainous architecture. So hostile to us that any hope of conquering it would be laughable. There are very few walls that are perfectly flat, very few paths that aren't in one way or another extremely confusing. It's like I'm trying to navigate a giant circuit board. The finer details reveal themselves the more you look out across the distance. A brutalist concrete chameleon that feels like it only changes its appearance when you're not looking. Who would have built a place like this? Who does it exist for? I think back to Halo. The outer framework of the Forerunner ruins were, in the same sense, not made for me to traverse them. But I did it anyway. But it's different now. Whereas before I found that, through great effort, I could traverse those structures, here I have no choice. There are moments in Naissance that feel unintentional, as if I'm playing the wrong way. Maybe I've reached a platform I wasn't supposed to, walked into a room that was built and then quickly forgotten amongst the disorienting manifold stonework. Maybe I traveled far past a border where the designer's hands became tired and procedural generation took their place, placing struts and supports in ways that no human could ever think of. When I discover a place like this electrical trench, stumble into a void of shifting shadows, or stand at the base of endless stairways, it feels like I found them completely by accident. that maybe I could be the first person who's ever stood here. There's a feeling of immense grandeur in all these places, but also simultaneous inevitability that, deep down, I always expected to find something like this. In this world, it makes sense that this treacherous staircase would be here, but I know it wasn't placed there by human hands. But there is no procedural generation in Naissance. It was indeed put together by human hands. Nothing is ever an accident. The developer has stated that Naissance's design is meant to encourage players to explore and experiment in the different ways to overcome each challenge. Try new things, stray off the beaten path, and just see what happens. And that experimentation rarely goes unrewarded. There are locations deep within Naissance that can be completely missed, places that exist only for themselves, to never be found. And it's up to your own investigative wit, and sometimes pure luck, to unearth these forgotten chambers. They do nothing to advance the story of the game, but like those distant islands, they help to lend a greater sense of legitimacy to Naissance's world. It feels like you could spend days in this place tinkering with what's possible and finding new paths to carve out, trying your best to bend Naissance's endlessly convoluted architecture to your will. And all the while, you'd still be playing the game as the developer intended, though it may not always feel that way. Even with all this freedom, there are still heights that you'll never reach. No matter how hard you try, there will be roads you'll never travel. Again, this world really wasn't meant for us to inhabit. There's no reason for its existence. Its sole purpose isn't to be explored. It simply exists, and nothing else. On a macro scale, it seems that so little of this game is intended as the playable area, compared to the miles of impossibly contrived stonework stretching out into the distance. Your eyes can only see so far. Who knows what lies just around the corner? There are things in this world that are very simply not meant for us to know. But don't get too sad just yet. There exists within Naissance an age-old video game tradition that we can very easily exploit. All it takes is one button, a simple developer console, and a single 5-letter word. Ghost. This is impossible. Not that we're viewing Naissance through a lens not afforded to us by its creators, although it is extremely rad, but that it, even still, manages to keep up the facade, never breaking the illusion. It just keeps going, dozens of miles into the distance, deep into the lowest recesses of its bottomless chasms. You would think that we would start seeing some of those visual glitches, but that really doesn't happen here. Naissance's world doesn't really disintegrate the way you would think it would using an exploit like this. It's all there. It all exists. Naissance's world simply does not end. At least not for a long while. Traveling from one end of this world to the other, even with no obstacles in our way, can still take an excruciatingly long time. But just as it is during normal play, your experimentation seldom goes unrewarded. If there were an incorrect way to play Naissance, then this is absolutely it. But seeing its world through this lens grants us an even deeper appreciation for what's being achieved here. We've transformed the world from a hostile, brutalist purgatory of perilous walkways and menacing darkness into an untouched, ruminative frontier of beautifully impossible architecture. I mean, just look at this. It's inconceivable. It's batshit insane. And it's absolutely fantastic. Earlier, when I was talking about Halo, I know a lot of you may have been thinking, and maybe you've already commented, I know Brian says he really just likes to try and get out of bounds in these games whenever he can, but I don't know. Some of the places that he's standing just seem a little too good to be true. There's no way he got there with some well-timed jumps, grenades, and a few vehicles. And you'd be right. Recently added into the Master Chief Collection is the modifier skull called Acrophobia. This skull works in a similar way that the Ghost Command works in Naissance. You can fly just about anywhere you can think of. The speed at which you move is insane, usually enough to kill you. The heights you can reach with this thing are huge, unless you're playing Halo 3 where they hate you. But it's really fun to get a behind-the-scenes look at how these worlds are built, even if it risks permanently breaking your immersion and ruining the mystery forever. And you would be surprised just how much of the world is still very much interactable. This is all part of a weird niche that I'm sure only appeals to a select few people. But I really wish more games would incorporate features like this. It's fun to see what exists just outside a game's normal limitations. Find areas that were never used, yet are somehow still a bit functional. And honestly, flying around like this is just plain fun. This Acrophobia skull really is a great tool, and one that I wish we saw more often. I love when a game just gives you the keys and lets you run wild with what's possible. And thanks to an extremely cool website created by a YouTuber named Jasper, we now have those keys for over 70 games. Noclip.website is one of the coolest things I have ever seen come from the internet. It's a sort of digital museum where you can view and explore hundreds of different video game levels right in your browser, all while maintaining the scene's lighting, animations, and effects as accurately and faithfully as possible. Everything from the Nintendo 64, GameCube, and Wii, all the way up through PS2, Xbox, and PC. You can easily view these levels from every angle, fly anywhere, clip inside of objects, find hidden unused secrets discarded just out of sight, or travel to the edges of the world. It's really neat to be able to go back to the places and things from these old games that fascinated you as a child, and take a closer look to see how they were achieved. The sheer volume of levels you can view is staggering. They range from tiny single-room scenes to expansive oceans, wilderness, and cities. It's something that I frequently spend hours messing with. Of all the things I've found, here are just a few of my favorites. This texture of a hillside town just outside the viewable areas of the tennis courts in Wii Sports. This zoom out of the Great Bay Temple from Majora's Mask, which makes me feel totally vindicated in despising it. An aerial view of the stadium in Grand Theft Auto 3 that reveals a hidden joke that can't easily be seen during normal gameplay. The entirety of Pokemon Silver, including the late game Kanto region, and the Destiny Islands village, which is only used for a few cutscenes and can't be accessed at all during normal gameplay. I could go on forever with all the interesting things I found on this website, but I think that it would be better for you to just go and experience it for yourself. It really is a wonderful tool, and one that really doesn't have one specific purpose. It's a great resource for amateur game developers looking to get some insight on specific techniques used in games to achieve certain effects like water, skyboxes, the illusion of depth or motion, or really just smart performance optimization. It's the perfect tool for me, having used its studio mode countless times to record footage to use as B-roll in my own videos. But I think its best and most popular use is for the people who want to just go back and reminisce. Emulation isn't always user-friendly for a lot of people who want to play games. Maintaining old hardware is often even more difficult, and the current state of official preservation of legacy content from big developers is far less than great. So, having this window from which people can view all the nostalgic virtual locales from their childhood super easily is genuinely invaluable. There are nights where, as I'm getting ready to go to sleep, I'll take one last stroll across Outset Island, a quick flyover of the Comet Observatory, or a quiet walk through the cozy streets of Traverse Town, just to lower my heart rate for a bit. Remember the good old days of my gaming past, fill my mind with those fond memories to calm my nerves enough to help me sleep. I was lucky enough to have the chance to talk to the website's creator, Jasper, and his thoughts on Noclip really are fascinating.
My relationship to the project has changed the more I've worked on it, and what it has meant to me has changed over the years. It's not like these are in any way my worlds or my levels. It doesn't feel right for me to speak for what is primarily the work of so many other talented artists, designers, programmers, producers, and directors. Personally, what I really enjoy is exploring worlds and spaces. I like figuring out how things are connected and how things go together. It's always cool to see the floor plan for the universe, in a sense. I also really enjoy how much practical value game developers get out of it. I've had a lot of people reach out and say that studying level layouts in Noclip has really improved their craft. This is something that traditionally you'd learn by joining a game development studio and seeing the designs of the previous game or talking to the rest of your design department. In the olden days of game development, everyone was experienced, but as the game dev scene has continued to grow, there's so many people who haven't had that opportunity. So in some sense, Noclip provides a great study resource for that kind of practical training, though it definitely has a selection bias of what's featured on the site. Then there's plenty of people who use it to study old video game graphics or what happens out of bounds. I know for a lot of people, seeing a video game out of bounds can be unsettling. Seeing how sharp this well-crafted world cuts off right at the border, how carefully it was painted to camera. There's no wrong way to use Noclip. I think it can be an educational resource, a wallpaper generator, a nostalgia trip, and a set of worlds to get lost in all at the same time. People have told me they use it for role-playing, to get backgrounds for videos, to study game lore, for webcomics, for memes, for art reference. And if I want one thing to come across, I don't feel like Noclip is my work, nor should my viewpoint matter. I hope I can bring back some of that weird whimsy and wonder. I want it to feel like this weird little internet mystery you stumble across and less like a product of corporate internet.
Once when I was driving to a friend's place a few years ago, I noticed this abandoned house on the side of the road. Overgrown, rotting, tucked away into the thick brush. I drove past it so quickly that I really didn't get a good look at it. But for one reason or another, I was endlessly fascinated by it. I knew I couldn't just turn around and go back, so I got a different idea. Go on to Google Maps and use Street View to get a more detailed look. I saw that house from every angle I was able to. Staring at it, just guessing who might have once lived there, where they are now, and why the house had just been left to rot for so long. When I finished studying that old house, I started to get even more curious. What was the surrounding area like? Were there other houses like it? Had they too been forgotten, left to be reclaimed by nature? What other secrets were hidden nearby? The more curious I got, the farther away I traveled, zooming out further and further, diving back down again and again to get more detailed looks at the landscape. And before long, I had forgotten the house entirely. Now I was in Glacier National Park in Montana, and 3 hours had passed. I love seeing aerial views of famous landmarks, sweeping over majestic mountain ranges and peeking down into their valleys, hopping from island to island in the Pacific Ocean, a few of which are unmarked and unnamed, but undoubtedly have evidence of human habitation. My favorite thing to do easily is get up close and personal. I'm in Street View. I'm in the 360-degree photospheres. It's really hard to get a feel for a place from above. You have to be down at ground level to really get to know it. It's just really fun to mess around with. One of my favorite things to do is zoom way out and drop the Street View cursor somewhere in the middle of the US, and count just how many times I land somewhere that has a Dollar General in view. It's kinda scary how often it happens. I think the thing that I really love is how intimate it all feels. I love seeing people sitting out on their porch, hosting a garage sale, the different apartment windows, each one a person, with lives that are just as complex as mine. People out for a walk, stopping for coffee on their way to work, admiring nature. I love getting a glimpse into the everyday lives of people whose day-to-day is so vastly different from my own, separated by thousands of miles and pure circumstance. Maybe it's warm, sunny. Maybe it's below freezing. Maybe it's idyllic. Maybe it's unfair. Are these people happy with their place in the world? What do they think about? What do they dream? Do they ever wonder about my corner of the world? It all feels unfathomably huge, but small and cozy at the same time. Some of my favorite places on Earth that I've found always tend to be places that feel like they exist on the edge of the world. Regions far away from civilization that humanity has somehow been able to leave a small mark on. What are these people doing all the way out here? Why live in a place so disconnected from humanity? What is it about the desolation that made them want to make it their home? The easy way to look at all of this is to say that these people are crazy for living in places so extreme. And maybe through some extremely nihilistic worldview, they reject the rest of society and simply want to do everything in their power to narcissistically reject the rest of us. Why else would they risk so much to root themselves so far from the rest of their species in landscapes that are so inhospitable? But I think that's a needlessly pessimistic way of looking at things. I believe that it's absolutely astonishing what they've done. Look at how far they've come. Look at what they were able to accomplish. They saw the invisible walls that modern society had put up around them and refused to give them any power, refused to play by their rules. Every house on the edge of a windswept cliff is absolutely arresting. Every Arctic town where the sun never sets is an incredible achievement. Every village on a remote island thousands of miles from the mainland is a miracle. Look at the things we can achieve, all the awe-inspiring places we can go. Look in amazement at human resilience in its purest form. It's a wonderful little experience to have this window into another life, to experience parts of the world I'll never see with my own eyes, all the places I'll never get to go. It makes me feel a little closer to them, and helps me to understand my place in this world just a little bit better. It's a beautiful day, and I just really didn't want to miss it. Not like this is anything super crazy. This park is only like 10 minutes from my house. But not long ago, this would have been a really big deal. If you watched my last video, you'll remember when I was talking about my agoraphobia. Agoraphobia basically is an intense fear of places that feel like they're outside of your control, that you can't escape. And I didn't really go into too much detail about that. But man, was it bad. I missed part of my high school's graduation because of it. I remember there was a camping trip at this lake that I didn't go to. I said I was sick. I missed more than a few parties, lots of hikes, hangouts, all because I was scared. Even to this day, when I'm invited to something, I can still hear that small voice in the back of my head, begging me to say no. About 2 years ago, a really good friend of mine asked me if I wanted to go to Washington State with him and a group of other people who I barely knew at the time. I remember when he was asking me, all I could hear was, "I want you to fly across the country alone to hang out with a bunch of strangers and stay in an apartment belonging to someone you've only met once." I was terrified. It was expensive, and it sounded a little dangerous too. It felt like traveling to the edge of the world. I'm reminded again of Liam's friend zone. When I asked myself why the world was so difficult to navigate, and why the best parts of it were kept hidden away, I didn't even realize how close I was to the answers for both those questions. Because that's everything, right? I said no to so many experiences that, whether or not I would have known it at the time, really would have helped me grow. Nothing is ever easy. Sometimes it's hard just to get out of bed. I was never required to go out of bounds in Halo, and I could have quit Naissance at any time to just play something easier. They're both very difficult things, and honestly, kind of annoying. But I did it. I can say that I did it. I put in the effort and went out of my way to experience things that a lot of other people might not. And I did it for me. And there is no reason why that feeling should be exclusive to video games. There is some risk in everything we do. Whether it's flying across the country or driving 10 minutes down the road. All the places that I'll never get to see with my own eyes, that seem so far out of reach. It took a lot of effort, but I'm a vastly different person now than I was then. And if you're wondering, I did go to Washington. It was incredible, and those strangers turned into lifelong friends. There was a time when I thought I'd never see these places with my own eyes, that they'd forever remain as photos on a screen, taken by satellites and people far braver than I am. But I've come to learn something, that the boundaries of my life were ones that I had built myself, and I can just as easily tear them down.
Hey, I'm having the best day right now. We having a